ओम श्री परमात्मने नमः। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। श्रीमद्भगवद्गीता साधका संजीवनी 9th chapter, the most confidential knowledge. Introduction. In the 7th chapter, Lord Krishna was unfolding to Arjuna knowledge, wisdom with realization. But in between, Arjuna at the beginning of the 8th chapter put 7 questions. So Lord Krishna, by answering the first 6 questions, in brief answered in detail the 7th question. How are you to be known at the time of death by the self-controlled? Now, the Lord starts the same topic of knowledge with realization, Vijnana, in the 9th chapter, verses 1 to 6. Description of Vijnana, realization with its glory. Verse 1. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Edam tu te guhetamam pravakshyami ansuyave Jnanam Vijnana Sahitam Yajgyatva Mokshasya Ashubhat. The Blessed Lord said, to you who do not cavil, I shall now unfold the most profound knowledge, Jnana, along with realization, Vijnana, knowing which you will be released from evil, that is, evil of worldly birth and death. Comment. Lord Krishna wants to unfold the topic which is the most profound secret and can't be disclosed to all because the Lord has described his own merit in it. One who possesses the carping spirit in the least can take the contrary meaning that Lord Krishna is boasting of his own merits. Affinity with the unreal is an evil, which is the cause of birth in good and evil wombs. This affinity is not real, it is merely assumed by error. So a man can be liberated from this assumed affinity by not assuming it. Actually, the man, soul, is an eternal fragment of the Lord, but it assumes its affinity of I-ness and mine-ness with the body and the world, and thus dies and is reborn. When he realizes the reality or he is inclined towards God, then he is released from the evil of worldly birth and death. In the next verse, Lord Krishna mentions the merits of knowledge with realization. Verse 2. Raja Vidya Raja Guhyam Pavitram Edam Uttamam Pratyakshavagamam Dharmyam Susukham Kartum Avayam. This knowledge with realization is the sovereign science, the sovereign secret, supremely holy, the most excellent, directly realizable, attended with virtue, very easy to practice and imperishable. Comment. This knowledge with realization is the sovereign science after knowing which nothing remains to be known. This is the sovereign secret because in the world there is nothing more secret than this. As an actor in a play conceals his identity, similarly, the Lord is not manifest to all because the men devoid of devotion have a carping spirit, but he is manifest to his loving devotees. This is something very secret. This science is supremely holy and purified. By this science, even the vilest sinner becomes virtuous, namely holy, and secures lasting peace. This science is the most excellent because it makes my devotee the noblest. He becomes so noble that I obey him. About those devotees, the Lord declares, they abide in me and I abide in them. That is, by being absorbed in me, they become one with me. It is directly realizable. The more one knows it, the more uncommon he becomes. As soon as he knows it, he secures lasting peace. Thus, it is directly realizable. It is virtuous. All the actions performed for God realization without the desire for fruit are included in virtuous actions. It is imperishable. The Lord has also said that his devotee never perishes. It is very easy to practice. How easy it is to offer a leaf, a flower, a fruit, or water, etc. to God by regarding them as His. If a devotee offers the things to God, thinking them as His own, the Lord reciprocates them infinite times more. But if he offers them to Him regarding them as His, God's, He offers Himself to Him. How easy it is! He has only to rectify his error. Then it is very easy to practice and is also sovereign. Why do people not avail themselves of it? The answer comes. Verse 3. Ashraddhanaha purusha dharmasyasya parantapa aprapya mam nivartante mrityu sansar vartamani. People devoid of faith in the dharma, failing to reach me, O oppressor of the foes, revolve in the path of the mortal world. Comment. Dharma is of two types, Swadharma and Paradharma. Even existent self is Swadharma and nature and its evolutes is Pradharma. What a wonder it is that men have faith in bodies, families, wealth and property, etc., which are kaleidoscopic and depend on them. They don't reflect how long they will remain with bodies and how long those bodies will remain with them. They should depend on the self or on God. The Lord says that He is present in all climes, times, things and persons, and He is even attained. Those who have faith in the mundane instead of attaining Him toss in the path of birth and death. If they are born, they are to die. If they die, they are to be born. To whatever species they go, they assume affinity with those species. Actually, their connection with those bodies is constantly severing. This affinity cannot last. Such type of people revolve in the path of the mortal world. Even after reaching the higher regions as the abode of Brahma, etc., they have to return. It means that there is rebirth so long as they don't attain Him, God. A man has got a right to realize God. Even the demoniac natured men can attain Him. So the Lord declares, even the vilest sinner can become virtuous and secure lasting peace. And even the most sinful of all sinners can cross over all sins by the raft of knowledge. There was a city surrounded by high walls, having an exit. A blind man, with the help of a stick, wanted to grope his way to go out of the city. But as soon as he neared the exit, he had an itching sensation. So he began to scratch his skin. Thus, he missed the exit and went ahead. This routine continued and he could not go out. Similarly, this soul revolves in heaven, hell and 84 lakh forms of lives but is unable to be liberated. So the Lord by this grace bestows this human body so that he may be freed from this cycle of birth and death. But he suffers from the itch for pleasures. Thus, by hankering after prosperity and pleasures, he dies and follows the cycle of birth and death. We have come to this human world to attain salvation, but we get attached to the bodies, families, wealth, property, etc., which are not ours, and forget that we belong to God and His abode. So, we think that it is very difficult to attain Him, God. The fact is that it is very easy to attain Him because He pervades every time, everywhere, all things, men, incidents and circumstances, etc. And all are in Him. So, we are ever with Him and He is ever with us. We can't be separate from Him and He can't be separate from us. It means that we don't belong to this mortal world, and this mortal world, including men, things, bodies, etc., does not belong to us. We are only God's and only God is ours. In the next two verses, there is the description of the sovereign signs which is mentioned in the first two verses. Verses 4 and 5. मया ततं एदं सर्वं जगद् अव्यक्तमूर्तिना मतस्थानि सर्वभूतानि न चाहं तेष्व अस्तित्वः न च मतस्थानि भूतानि पश्यामि योगम् ऐश्वरम् भूताभृन्न च भूतस्थो ममात्मा भूतभवनः. All this universe is pervaded by me in my unmanifest form. All beings abide in me, but I don't abide in them, nor do the beings dwell in me. Look at my divine yoga. Being the creator and sustainer of beings, myself does not dwell in them. Comment. The Lord's manifest form is that which is known by mind, intellect and senses, while his unmanifest form is that which is not known by mind, intellect and senses. It means that he exists in both the forms. The Lord abides in the world and the world abides in the Lord. The Lord does not abide in the world and the world does not abide in the Lord. Waves are in water and water is in waves, but waves have no existence of their own besides water. Similarly, the world has no existence of its own besides the Lord, because, like waves, the world beings emanates from the Lord, dwells in him, and merges in him. Thus, the Lord abides in the world and the world abides in the Lord. But if we don't accept independent existence of the waves because they have no existence besides water, there is neither water in waves nor waves in water. There remains only water, which appears as waves. Similarly, neither God abides in the world nor does the world abide in God. The world has no existence of its own besides the Lord. All this is God. All the earthenware vessels have nothing besides clay. So there is clay in them and they are in clay. But actually it is not so. If there had been clay in earthenware vessels, with the destruction of the earthenware vessels, clay would have been destroyed. But it is not so. Similarly, if earthenware vessels had been in clay, they would remain safe forever like clay. But it is not so. It means that earthenware vessels are not in clay. In the same way, neither God dwells in the world nor does the world dwells in God. If God dwelt in the world, he would die with the death of the world. But he does not die. It means that he does not dwell in the world. He is established in his own self. Similarly, if the world dwelt in God, the world would continue to exist with the existence of God. But the world perishes, so the world does not dwell in God. The Lord is the creator and the sustainer of all beings, but he does not dwell in them. That is, he does not depend on them and is not attached to them. He, in spite of being the creator and sustainer of the world, remains detached, free from egoism and excessive fondness. A striver should bring up his family and manage other affairs by remaining free from attachment, mindness, and egoism, etc. A striver should behold the world as the Lord's manifestation and its affairs as the sport of the Lord, and should ever remain satisfied and pleased. A vital fact. If a striver tries to understand, he can realize all this is God. The criterion is that he remains equanimous in favorable and unfavorable circumstances, regard and disregard, praise and reproach, etc. Other people may criticize his principles and beliefs and say that his belief that in the world there is nothing besides God is merely a fancy. He should not feel any sort of deficiency in his belief. He should remain unaffected and unperturbed. He should not seek arguments and illustrations to prove his point. His realization should be constant and natural. A striver has not to give any thought in this respect. Now the Lord explains how the beings dwell in him by an illustration. Verse 6. Yatha kasha sthito नित्यं वायुः सर्वत्र गो महान् तथा सर्वाणि भूतानि मत्स्थानीत्य उपाधार्य. As the mighty wind moving everywhere ever rests in ether, likewise know that all beings rest in me. Comment. As the mighty wind moving everywhere ever rests in ether as breeze, air or wind, similarly all beings animate or inanimate revolving in the 3 worlds and 14 spheres dwell in the Lord. Just as wind is born of ether, remains in ether and merges in ether, the man soul emanates from the Lord, dwells in him and merges into him. When wind merges in ether, it has no existence of its own, only ether remains. Similarly, when the soul merges into the Lord, only he remains. An important fact: all beings rest in the Lord, but the bodies are born. They live and die because they are transitory, while the soul undergoes no change. This soul has its identity with God, but when it assumes its identity with the body by having a disinclination for God, it becomes conscious of its separate entity as I am a body. This I-ness consists of 2 fragments, the self and non-self, or it is called the embodied soul. In this I-ness, the fragment of non-self is naturally attracted towards nature. Having identity with the fragment of nature, the embodied soul mistakes this attraction of nature towards nature as its own and thinks, I should get riches, pleasures and worldly enjoyments. Thus, he has this inclination towards God to a great extent. It accepts the body's death as its own. Actually, this soul is an eternal portion of the Lord, but by having affinity with the world, it wants to enjoy worldly pleasures and to maintain the body forever. Actually, this desire is to remain with God forever because he has his real affinity with him. However, he, embodied soul, may identify himself with the body, yet his affinity and attraction towards God can neither vanish nor there is any possibility of their vanishing. I should ever live. I should ever be happy. I should attain supreme joy. In this form, attraction for God subsists in him, but he commits the blunder that he wants to attain this supreme joy through worldly objects. By an error, he has a desire for pleasures which are transitory. If he realizes the reality that all the worldly pleasures are perishable and sources of pain, his desire for them perishes and his desire to attain the eternal bliss is aroused. The more this desire is aroused, the more disinclination a striver has for the perishable objects, etc. When he has a total disinclination for them, he realizes that he has rested in the Lord since time immemorial. Om Tat Sat. All glories to Sri Partha Sarthi, Lord Shri Krishna. All glories to Bhagavad Vani, SrimadbhagvadGeeta. Sri Hari Arpanamastu.